Namaste, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the For the Culture podcast, a show in which we aim to take what Hinduism has to offer and present it to the rest of the world in a comprehensible manner. My name is Vedant Ganesh, and today I'm joined by my friends and co-hosts Sanjeet Verma and Pranav Patel. Together, the three of us make up Team Jigglypuff, your host for this podcast, and the topic of the day is the Ramayana.
The Ramayana is a central itihasa or historical epic of Hinduism, and while the assumption is our core audience is familiar with the text, here's a quick rundown to catch you up to speed. The itihasa follows the life of Prince Ram, a noble and virtuous man whose wife was kidnapped by the evil king Ravana. While unjustly banished from his kingdom, Prince Ram wages a war of epic proportions to save his wife.
Yeah. And I think today in specific, we're going to talk about the book by Amiganatra, the Ramayana Unravelled. And this book, elucidates, talks on the lesser known facets of the epic. And that's what we want to focus on today. And so the epic is thousands and thousands of years old, meaning lots of time to study it, which also means many, many takeaways, key takeaways to discuss and, unravel. And so some that we're going to focus on today are things like fate versus free will, self-discipline or the concept of India Nigraha, and debunk a bunch of myths or misconceptions that have been brought up while reading through and discussing the Ramayana. And so, guys, I want to start off the whole thing of fate versus free will. This one was the most interesting to me, in my opinion. But throughout the Ramayana, it's been the whole theme of fate versus free will or action was explored quite a bit. For example, initially many people assumed that when Ram was given exile, that he just peacefully accepted it and just said, oh, it is what it is. But after reading the book, it turns out that he did privately go express to his brother Lakshman how he was distressed and questioning why something to this degree of like misfortune could happen to me. I've been an excellent brother, an excellent son, a great prince of this kingdom. Why did this happen to me? So I want to hear y'all's thoughts on that.
No, I think that's a great take. And honestly, as a reader, it was rather relieving to know that despite Lord Ram being all perfect as he is, he still was upset that life took a turn for the worse for him. Um, but he handled his fate with grace. So it sort of reminds me of the modern day philosophy of Stoicism, which we attribute to the Greeks, even though we can see the ancient Hindus practicing it here. How Lord Ram was upset, he voiced his emotions. He complained a little bit to Lakshman, his confidant, but after he processed his emotions, he calmed down and just accepted what life had to give him with grace.
I think another layer, you can go a little bit deeper than this, and you can say that there's a fine line between taking action and gracefully accepting something. So when Lord Rama, he has done his duty and had done his dharma, um, as a son, as a heir to the throne, and he had done everything right up until the point that he was banished to the forest. And just like Vedant said, he had gracefully accepted that. That was the time to accept it. Um, but the time to take action would have been a time like when Sita was abducted by Ravana. And you could argue that it was fate that had done that, but then and there, Ram had decided to take some action.
I think another good story about this famous of free will is when Dashrath was younger, he had mistakenly killed Shravan Kumar, and knowing his parents were blind, he easily could have gone up to them and said, "Oh, this happened," or just left the situation alone altogether. And so maybe that part of him accidentally killing him could have been described as fate, but then his actual action or free will was when he went up to them, owned up to his mistakes, gracefully accepted the curse that was given to him, took accountability for his own actions and tried to move on and redeem himself after that. And so I think that Raman does a beautiful job of kind of differentiating these specific times where fate was shown and free will was shown as well.
Just to add on to that, I think the fact that Dashrata had so much self-awareness, and you could even call it self-discipline, to go up and own up to his mistakes, I think that's a really, really key point in what the difference is between Ram and Ravana. There's a concept called Indriya Nigraha, and it basically means restraint of the senses, and you could translate it to self-discipline as well. And I think both of these characters are very similar in the fact that they are um, enlightened. They've done a lot of tapasya, but the main kind of difference between both of these characters, Ram and Ravana, is the fact that one has a sense of Indriya Nigraha and he can restrain himself, and the other kind of gives into these selfish desires. So, what is kind of your guys' opinion on this?
No, I fully agree. And I like how you said it's the main differentiator because I think that the Ramayana is also an allegory for the inner battle that we face every day within our human and our animalistic natures, right? I think self-discipline, this Indriya Nigraha, is the main differentiator between what it means to be a human and what it means to be an animal. We all have these desires that might not be the best for us or for society, it might not be ethical, and it's our dharma to temper those, right? And to realize that they're bad and to not give in to them. Ravana failed to do that, which is why he is animalistic in nature. Rama is the ultimate man, human, because he had full control over himself.
I think a story that, talks about that or depicts that beautifully is again when Ram was, sent to exile. Obviously Ram being, I guess young at the time and also being a prince, the heir to the throne, growing up or being in that situation, wanting to become king is completely natural and very, very, they look forward to it a lot. They can't wait. But the completely unjust circumstance of Keikei, banishing him, telling him to go to exile, although he had all these emotions definitely loaded up inside of him, he remained completely composed, 100% respectful, and refrained from harboring any kind of resentment or seeking any kind of revenge. Instead, he stood there, controlled his emotions perfectly, and gracefully accepted what was given to him and went on with it.
Right. On the note of what Ram was feeling and what the audience was feeling, I sort of wanted to touch on some typical myths that, are spoken about the Ramayana, myths that I'm sure all of us believed before we read this book by Amiganatra. And the first one would be the idea of misogyny and how Ravana was a woman's right champion simply because he didn't lay hands on Sita Mata, which, first of all, is the absolute bare minimum. Like, you can't claim that someone is a virtuous man for not touching a woman when she didn't want to be touched. I think that's a load of nonsense. But interestingly enough, the book pointed out that Ravana had done this to women in the past. He had touched them without their consent, and for that they cursed him. And those curses hurt him very badly, and therefore it was sort of like a learned response to not lay hands on Sita Mata because like something really bad was going to happen. So not a virtuous person by any sense of the word over there. Any other myths that you guys want to talk about?
Yeah, there's one. There was one myth about the women in the Ramayana just being completely submissive or just, not being able to speak up for themselves at all. And I noticed that Ami Ganata, she, talked about an instance where these female characters would, subvert or resist this patriarchal oppression that was present. And one, such instance was when Sita actually decided to undergo the trial by fire or the Agni Pariksha to, prove her purity. And, that could be taken as an act of agency in a, state of like societal scrutiny. And so, again, it's shown that these women just, took what was given to them, didn't speak up, but we have proof in front of us that she did even though she had nothing to prove, she still went and underwent that Agni Pariksha and proved her purity to the entire society as well.
And you can even, I guess, relate this to another Itihasa, the Mahabharata, and you can relate it to Draupadi in the dice game scene. And if you guys have watched the '90s depiction of the Mahabharata, you can kind of see that Draupadi is depicted as this character that's just kind of forced against her will into the court, and just she's crying and she's just in distress and she needs help from another character when in reality she was actually standing up for her rights and she had done everything that she could. And then she had turned to Krishna and said, okay, please help me in this situation. And that looks like all the time that we are going to have for today. So thank you so much for tuning into the For the Culture podcast. We hope today's conversation was insightful and informative. Tune back next week for more Hindu derived content. Dhanyawad.